Video that nobody has been asking for, but I'm gonna give you. Today, we are talking about why the Suicide Squad. Oh, wait, no, hold on. Why the. Oh my god, there's no. Whatever. I was trying to get a poster to show you guys. It was gonna be, like, pretty epic, and. Yeah, I mean. Why the Suicide Squad failed. Yeah. Anyways, welcome back. Like, sub, and comment, or dislike, leave a hate comment, and don't not find my address, because I'm very nervous about that. Anyways, I want to go over why the Suicide Squad failed. My quick thoughts on this are that, on the movie, I should say, is that it's a great movie, great action, entertaining with a capital E. I thought it was a very entertaining movie, a vast improvement over this garbage fire known as Suicide Squad, the Suicide Squad, or the Suicide Squad. Had amazing action, a great villain, some of the best CGI in any comic book film. It's funny, it's gory, it's graphic, it's got dark humor. It's like everything you want in this kind of movie, and it delivered on all fronts. Solid 9 out of 10 in my top 10 comic book films for sure. It was just a very entertaining movie. Now, why is it failing? Why is it failing? Why did it make 72 mil on its opening weekend, and why did it underperform? Well, that's what I'm going to go into. So, allow me to play this video of all clips and trailers of the Suicide Squad while I explain why this movie failed. Make sure the volume's off. I don't actually, hold on. I think I want to do it this way because it's only recording a portion of it. Okay. So, why did the Suicide Squad fail? Reason number 1, HBO Max. Now, if you don't know what HBO Max is, it's basically the Netflix for Warner Brothers and HBO, the TV channel streaming service. And essentially, they have the rights to DC movies like The Suicide Squad. And due to the current pandemic, they decided to release all of their movies in the next year, both in theaters and on HBO Max simultaneously. Now, I think there's no question that if this movie was just in theaters, more people would have gone out to the movies and seen it. I certainly would have, because I'm very I was very much looking forward to this movie, and if it was only in theaters, I would have been forced to go to the movies. I personally don't feel safe going to the movies, but I would have put my life in danger for the chance to see this beautiful film. And by the way, the color grading on this movie is very colorful. And another ad! You know what? You know what, YouTube? You can just go away, because I hate these ads so much on my video. It's a shame. Six Flags. Coca-Cola. What a joke. Anyways. So yeah, it was on HBO Max, and obviously a lot of people, due to the Delta variant and all this stuff, they're not gonna want to go to the movies, so they're gonna see it on HBO Max. And it actually was HBO Max's highest viewed movie after Mortal Kombat. And I think that just says a lot to the fact that there are a lot of people who are not interested in going to the theaters, or that are not feeling safe in going. And I also believe that the marketing campaign for this movie and the trailers were also pretty weak, and I don't think they gave a good sense of what this movie actually was and how brilliant it was. And so before I go into I know I brought up the lack of interest point, but just to finish off the HBO Max thought, I think that, again, if you didn't put the movie on HBO Max, it would have made more money, and I think that ultimately Warner Brothers' decision to make every single movie over the next year on HBO Max might not have been the best decision, but it seems like A Quiet Place 2's strategy of putting it in theaters for like a month and then putting it out in a shorter time span than a normal movie would seems to have worked a lot better. But then, of course, people would just wait. So, going on to the lack of interest, the first movie was heavily criticized. People hated it. People that, like, don't even watch comic book movies, like, everyone hated the Suicide Squad back in 2016. And then we got Birds of Prey, which a ton of people absolutely hated. Some of it was valid, and some of it was because it was just an angry white males who were misogynistic and sexist, and didn't like the wokeness of the movie, even though that's just stupid. But yeah, so the brand of Harley Quinn, the brand of the Suicide Squad, and DC in general was in a pretty bad spot. And ultimately, I just don't think anyone was asking for a sequel. And when they got this movie, they weren't quite clear, was this a sequel? Was this a reboot? They didn't really have a good idea of what this movie was. And I think a lot of this has to do with the marketing, because I think the marketing of this movie could have been a lot better, and I don't know how they would have better marketed it. I'm not like a marketing expert, but my personal decision, I think I would have gone for a more, I guess, four quadrant approach, which is like males, not males and females, but like families, older people, younger people, middle aged people. Because I feel like this movie, the marketing for this movie, especially if you watch the Red Band trailers, it kind of gave off the vibe that this movie wasn't gonna be for everybody. And I feel like you should have at least tricked the audience into believing that this movie was for everybody, because I think it just turned off a lot of people. So, yeah, I think the marketing could have just been a lot better. And again, when you have such a bad track record, even just DC movies in general, beyond the Suicide Squad, people are not going to want to waste their time on a film that they might see as stupid. And I also believe that the characters and the actors in this movie are not very well known, and they don't create a lot of interest or buzz. And someone pointed out on, I think it was the John Campea show, that, Will Smith sequels don't tend to do as well, and that, the first Suicide Squad movie had Harley Quinn, and that was the first appearance, and everyone was excited for that. It had Jared Leto as the Joker, so there were more things to get excited about than in the first film than in this movie. And I think that the lack of interest, I think, is what led people to not want to see the show, thinking, "Oh, I'm just gonna wait," because I feel like there's an overabundance of movies. Like, you have A Quiet Place 2, The Conjuring, F9, Black Widow. These films that are very similar in terms of their stories, like Fast and Furious 9, Snake Eyes, Black Widow, Suicide Squad. They kind of will all mesh together and seem like they're just the same movie, essentially, even though they are completely different in many, many ways. And I just think that people were not really interested in seeing this movie, because they just thought this was just another generic comic book film, and this kind of was too similar. And I also believe that, you know, the economics of the world the economics of the world right now are not very favorable for families or people that are your kind of average Joe moviegoers who will only see a couple movies a year, and they might not have the money to pay for HBO Max or to pay for the movies. And I think what studios have to understand is that it's going to take a lot to get back to where we were, and you cannot have so many movies coming out in clutters, because it basically makes only a couple of movies succeed and a lot of movies fail. The Suicide Squad, Black Widow to an extent, In the Heights, I think these movies didn't do so well because they were put out too close together. And in the case of In the Heights, it just got lost in the noise of the many movies that came out in the past 3 months. And I just think there were too many movies that came out, and I don't think you can, maybe at least in the future, but maybe when COVID gets better, have two big blockbusters come out in the same month or in the same 2 months, because one of the blockbusters, even if it's really good, won't do as well because people already saw the first one and they think it's just too similar. I also think the pandemic has made people have an expectation for movies, and if it's not what they want, then they're going to just move on. So I feel like people's expectations or standards are higher, and it's on streaming, and there's so many things to watch on streaming, and people are only going to prioritize so many things, and I think the Suicide Squad was not something that people will or are prioritizing. So we've basically gone over the HBO Max being a contributing factor, a lack of interest, not a great marketing campaign, and I completely forgot what I just was talking about. And the fact that some people can't afford a price ticket. I also think that, if you look at the views for the trailers, they were pretty small in a week, and I think that's because they were kind of keeping the character or the villain of Starro a mystery. Like, you didn't really get a good sense of what the plot was of this movie, and I feel like the jokes that they placed kind of seemed a bit weaker. And yeah, I just feel like they kind of needed to they needed to tell the audience why they needed to see this movie. Because the concept of the movie is very intriguing. It's about this giant starfish that like puts uh things of itself on other people's faces, and that's that's a pretty intriguing idea. It's a very weird idea, but I think if you gave a better sense of what the movie was about, and making it differentiating it from other films that look like it, which I think you could have, I think it would have made people more interested in seeing this. Also, this movie is just very weird, and I think the main problem with this movie is it's an R-rated movie that's got a huge budget, released in a pandemic. Those kind of movies are bound to fail, and they're already a huge risk in a non-pandemic society. And this is a movie that you can't take the family to, that you can't maybe take your grandma to, your grandpa. It's something that appeals to the male demographic, anywhere from the ages of 10 to like 30. Like males, especially teenage males, I think are going to love this movie, or loving this movie. But because it's rated R, half of your demographic can't even see the movie. And I think that's a major problem. I think, the R rating, I think, definitely hurt this movie in the long run. And I think it's got very dark humor. It's very violent and graphic and gory. And there were people like Tyrone Magnus who said, I didn't like this movie, or Grace Randolph who said, I didn't like this movie because it was just too dark, it was too violent, it was uncomfortable to watch. And I think that's because audiences aren't used to seeing movies where the main character dies. Half of the main characters die at the beginning. There's a ton of violence and gore, and it's just not what you'd expect from a typical comic book film. It's not reinventing the genre like Guardians is, and I think that's why Guardians succeeded, because it kind of reinvented things and made unexpected moves that people really appreciated who didn't like the comic book film or just liked it but wanted to see something new and fresh. Whereas this was staying within the mold, but just being a lot more drastic and hardcore than most people probably wanted. Some people just don't like this movie because of how violent it is, and I think that's because we as audiences are not used to seeing this kind of bloody movie in a mainstream kind of way. So this movie is, in concept, a very mainstream movie, and I know there's an ad. Oh, well, it's very mainstream in its concept, but the actual items in the movie are very, I guess you could call, controversial, or just not mainstream, not appealing to the general public. And I think that's a shame, because I think this movie is a movie that comic book fans would want more, because it's got a great commentary on like American patriotism in John Cena's character. It's got great humor. It's just something that everyone can like, but I just think it's too much for people. And then you might think, oh well, what about Deadpool? What about Joker? Well, I think people expected Deadpool to be very raunchy based on the character. Like, they wanted Deadpool to be rated R. Like, people want the MCU to make Deadpool R. They have that expectation. And I would say to an extent, Deadpool doesn't even go as far as Suicide Squad, in my opinion. Same thing with Joker. People wanted a Joaquin Phoenix gritty Joker movie. Like, that's an expectation audiences had and wanted. Whereas I feel like with the Suicide Squad, people weren't expecting it to be as graphic as it was. And even though they knew it was going to be R-rated, or because they didn't know the story enough or the characters enough, they thought that this movie would come off as more of a PG-13, edgier film. And another thing that I think I want to point out is you just saw it, they said, from the horrible, beautiful mind of James Gunn, they marketed this as a James Gunn movie, because that means something to comic book fans, to movie nerds. We know, he created Suicide Squad. We know from the trailer this is his personality. But to the mainstream and the majority of people, who cares about James Gunn, and who is James Gunn? That doesn't mean anything to them. The only reason why this movie had any interest is because a lot of people that were into movies saw this was a James Gunn film, so they were going to stick with it and hope for the best with it and have an investment in it. And I think HBO Max relied too heavily on that name to sell this movie, because they'd be like, it's a James Gunn film, and people would be like, who? And I think that what Hollywood has to understand is selling it on a name alone, unless it's very popular, is just not a wise move. And I feel like they relied on that and used that as like a a way to lean back on and cheat, but it kind of backfired on them because while James Gunn means a lot to a lot of people, it doesn't mean a lot to a lot of other people. But I mean, half of the video people that are watching this video, or my subscribers, probably don't even know who James Gunn is, and that's the whole problem, is that they expected too much from the audience. And again, I think that this movie just does not appeal to the four quadrants. And when you're making a superhero film, the reason why they're so heavily tested is because they cost a lot and they need to appeal to the most amount of people as possible. And this movie definitely does not appeal to the most amount of people. It's very weird. It can come off as stupid. The costumes are weird. Like, people on TikTok were like, "Oh, I thought this movie was like a parody film," and that says a lot about people not understanding the humor of James Gunn or understanding the story enough. And I think that is also the blame on the marketing and Warner Brothers almost not giving enough not having enough control over the movies, whereas with BVS and Justice League they had too much control. And it's weird because on TikTok I'm seeing a lot of people who honestly love this movie, liberals, conservatives, like everyone like loves this movie. They love what it says about America, or they like that it's just a fun action film. But I feel like it's a small minority of people, and I even saw some people saying like, "Oh, where can I watch this?" or "I didn't know this movie came out." So I think there's a lot of misconceptions about this movie, unclear things about this movie, and I think it's a movie that just came out at the wrong time, and there were some movies that just come out and not enough people pay attention to it at the time that it comes out, and that's just the sad reality of some movies. And I think that this movie just people aren't paying enough attention to it, or they don't really know it even came out. Another thing is that Pete Davidson is very popular because a lot of people in the TikTok videos and comments were saying, "I only watched this movie for Pete Davidson, and when he left I kind of lost interest." And I feel like, if anything, they underestimated Pete Davidson's marketability in this film. And I think that you know yeah, I think that Pete Davidson was underappreciated, underrated. And I also think that people just weren't understanding of the it's the Suicide Squad, and they weren't expecting characters to die. And there might have been some. I think there were a lot of people that watched it and just stopped watching it because they just were turned off by it. Because again, this movie isn't made for everybody. So hopefully that made sense. I know this was very unstructured. It went all over the place, but hopefully you can kind of get a better sense of why this movie failed, and it's hopefully a good video. Anyways, like, sub, and comment. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.